Hi there, I'm Trevor Coote, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, we are joined by Steve Jagger. Steve embodies the true definition of entrepreneur. Identify a gap, develop an innovative solution, and build a business around it. After founding combustion hosting and ubertour.com in the early 2000s, Steve and his partner created two other companies, outsourcingthingsdone.com and payrollhero.com, which evolved to support the first two. Following some acquisitions and sales, Steve created his current venture, Addy, a software that makes real estate investing attainable for everyone. I hope you enjoy this episode. Steve Jagger, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You and I met to talk about some other business stuff, and as I learned about your journey, I just said to you have to be on my podcast, and you graciously agreed. So really appreciate you taking the time. I'm looking forward to breaking down certain aspects of your business journey, but as I do with all guests, as before we get to the meat of it and into the details, what was your introduction to business? How did you find your entrepreneurial path?
Well, I got into starting my own company essentially a little bit outside of high school or after high school. School wasn't my thing.
Fair.
And I'm a little bit dyslexic and sort of all the stuff, and just the way they taught in school was definitely not the way I learned. And it took me a long time to figure out that just the way that they do it isn't necessarily nothing wrong with me. It's just the way that they teach is not the way that I learned. And so school wasn't my favorite thing to be doing. And while I had a good time at school, I was trying to figure out when I was young, like grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, of like, what did I want to do? And the standard you do is you go to university. It's just kind of was the default of like, next stage is this. And I wasn't totally sure if I wanted to do that. And I don't know, just trying to think about like, what were my options if university wasn't necessarily in the cards or something I was into? How could I become a productive member of society? And entrepreneurship seemed like an option where I was always interested in doing my own thing. I did a lot of stuff during high school. I had my own sort of, you could put air quotes around businesses during high school, not legitimate actual businesses, right. But I did employ my friends and we did some stuff. And I was always interested in that, but that's kind of, I think a lot of my mindset at the time was that I wanted to find a way to be able to make money and do things properly as an adult, and entrepreneurship seemed like a good path for me to go on.
So that's interesting to kind of explore it as a path right out of high school. What kind of backing what was that first kind of business venture, and how did you kind of get started, make sure that you still had some base to pay rent and living expenses?
Yeah. So I was lucky I was able to live at home. So I graduated high school. I think I had a couple sort of jobs outside of high school for the first maybe 3 years. And I started the first company with my business partner, Mike, in 2000. So I graduated high school in late, whatever it was, 96. So 97, 98, 99, I had some jobs.
Right.
It's weird. I got into debt collection, which is a whole story in itself of how that podcast. How that world works. But the interesting thing about it taught me a ton. Right. But the interesting thing about it is you can make good money. It's a commission-based business. So I was quite young, making okay money, and that is kind of and living at home with my parents is what enabled me to be able to kickstart the first business. So the first company we got into, I went to BCIT. They had a 3-month entrepreneurship program of I can't remember, it's called the venture program. And the idea was you'd go to the venture program. So this was the only part of university or college or whatever you want to call it, post-secondary education, that was like of interest to me. So you'd show up, you sign up for the venture program. It's 90 days. You come in with a business idea and you come out 90 days later with a business plan. And the whole course was like bringing people in to talk to you about business, scare you with some stories, talk to you about finance, figure out how to run numbers, figure out how to, what is your marketing plan, like just all the stuff that you don't really know. It was meant to be kind of you run the gauntlet for 90 days and just maybe you come out the end with the business plan and you're like, yeah, I'm 100% not going to do this. And that's that's also a great result.
Right.
And so I went into that venture program with the idea of starting a company selling advertising on the inside of taxi cabs, if you believe it. So this is, again, back in 1999. I thought it was a genius idea. And I came out of the venture program, I was coming at the end of the venture program wanting to do that. And one of the things I was trying to figure out was a website. And how do you build a website for this business to be able to attract advertisers? And so I went to my friend Mike, and he's a kind of a tech guy, and he'd been floating around in that world making websites for other companies. And I said, hey, here's the problem I've got. I'm trying to build a website. And he said, I'll help you with that, but you need to find yourself a web host. And I said, sure. What the hell's that? And so he explained to me what the web host was and what the role of web hosting was. And so I went digging to try and find a web host to host this new website. And so I made a list of things that I wanted because I didn't even know at the time of what I wanted. And so he was like, well, you're going to want to phone somebody if you've got questions. So like maybe a toll-free number, maybe 24/7 support. You're probably going to want to pay in Canadian dollars. So I went through this whole thing and made this list. Long story short, I couldn't find a web hosting company that was that fit an entrepreneur that didn't know anything really about the web. And I got to sort of caveat this. It's 1999. Yeah. I couldn't find a solution. I couldn't find a web host. Either it was an American company, they charged in advance and they charged US dollars, or it was a Canadian company, they charged Canadian dollars, but they didn't have phone support. It was all done on email, like whatever. I just couldn't find the right solution. So long story short, I ended up, Mike and I kind of deciding that maybe there was an opportunity here. The internet was becoming a thing. And maybe there was an opportunity to start a web hosting company that focused on entrepreneurs that were trying to build websites. And so that's what we did. We set up a company called Combustion Hosting in 2000, and that was our first business. And we were chasing small business owners, literally out of the phone book. For those that remember what a phone book is, trying to, like the dentist that needed a website, or the bakery that needed a website, or the law firm, or the whatever. Like nobody had really websites. And they were, if you did, they're super expensive, and the hosting was a challenge, and all these things. And so we built this business chasing those types of business owners. And one of the categories that we got into was realtors, because we figured out realtors were easy to find, right? Like trying to find the dentist, to call the dentist and get the dentist on the phone and say, hey, let's talk about your website that you don't have, and get you set up with web hosting and all these things. You'd get the receptionist, whoever at the dental firm, but you'd never get the dentist on the phone because he or she is dentisting. They're doing the dentist stuff. They're dentisting. Yeah. They're doing all the things to your mouth. And so you'd never get the decision maker on the phone because they were always in the back doing things. And so it was a difficult thing to track, like that. This one example of a difficult thing. And so we went through category after category. And then we realized, wow, like realtors have their cell phone numbers on business cards, and
they're the ones that are picking up the phone,
and they answer the phone, and they make the decision, and they need websites. And so then we pivoted from chasing kind of any small business and started really focusing on the realtor community. But anyway, that's how we got into Combustion Hosting, the first.
Yeah. So cool. I've got a couple of questions around that. The .com bubble in like right at 2000. Did that affect you? Was there kind of a perception as you were picking up the phone and talking to people about websites and the whole, everything collapsed around that time. Was there an impact there, or you were you were talking a different language?
Well, I think the beauty for us is we didn't know. We didn't know it was a tough time. Like we weren't part of the group that started, pets.com in 1995.
Yeah, you're not in Silicon Valley
or whatever it was. And those were the guys struggling in 2000. We were just figuring out this whole opportunity of the internet and the world of small businesses. And so, we hadn't raised venture capital to some crazy idea and it was failing and venture would dried up. Like we were just trying to get involved. So we were kind of oblivious to a lot of those bigger challenges at that time, where it was just, we're just trying to build a basic sustainable business.
Yeah. And then the kind of the lesson learned about that, getting that, targeting the client, the potential client that's actually on the phone with you. Is that something you've been able to leverage? Have you experienced that at other times, without kind of unraveling the entire story of your business journey? But like that's a really cool lesson to pull out, is like path of least resistance to the person that you need to talk to make the decision, right?
Yeah. Well, we learned a lot chasing those, the realtor category. So like we did kind of dive deep on that group, because like they were never calling us. Like we ran 24/7 customer service. You can imagine we're doing customer service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm still living at home. Mike's in his basement suite of his parents' home. And I'd set up another phone line that came right into my bedroom. And so if you called at midnight for customer service for your web hosting, you'd get me answering the phone. And so part of our learnings was realtors were never calling at midnight. It was, it was all the other random businesses that were doing stuff at night or whatever, but the realtors, that category wasn't. So we did try and dig into other groups and other business categories, but we kept on sort of circling back to the real estate agent being a reasonably good place for us to focus our efforts.
Right. And then were you kind of tracking metrics at that time, like just kind of, in whatever format it would have been, not as sophisticated as today, but to be able to know kind of who was calling when, be able to share that between you and Mike? Or was it just kind of, you kind of debrief and say like, these are all the calls that are coming in after hours?
Yeah. Like, so we tried to keep track of it. Yeah. And again, in a very like old school way now,
rudimentary,
compared to today.
Yeah.
We did, because a lot of, like, if you were the tech guy on the other end of the phone, or like a reasonably sophisticated person in the tech world calling our customer service, and you got me, I would be like level 1 customer service on how to fix certain things that you might have challenges with, of setting up your email, your DNS records, that kind of stuff. If it was like trying to get, like they had questions that were over my head, I'd have to figure out, like take notes down as to what they want, and then get Mike, or eventually we had one of our programmers that in early days would be able to help those people, but they would have to do that in the morning. Right. So we did try and keep track of like, what were the challenges? How do we make this better? How do we fix it so that phone doesn't ring again in the middle of the night? How do we document the requests so that we can make sort of a level 1 customer service person more educated on more advanced topics, and tried to systemize the business from the early days. But it was, we did okay, I think, at that, as we were still figuring all these things out.
Yeah. I have to refer back to a previous guest that was telling a story about they were a startup in their basement, kind of same idea. But they had a bunch of different phone numbers put into different lines in the house. So when the living room rang, it was accounts payable. And when the kitchen phone rang, it was accounts receivable. And it was just the two of them working, but it made it seem like they could transfer. It made it seem like the company was bigger. So
totally.
That they could,
we did this similar kind of stuff, right? We had that second line. Actually, my family house, we had 2 lines already. So the line in my bedroom was the third line in the house.
Right.
But I was lucky. My older brother's company had started in the same bedroom I was in, so I just had to turn that line on again. It was
Oh
already
yeah.
piped into the house. But the downside I learned was we were thinking we were geniuses. We bought a residential phone line, not a commercial phone line, because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And what we didn't realize is residential lines show up in the phone book. And so at
Yeah.
some point, some person came to the house to like pay a bill or ask a question because you could find the address associated with the phone number. And someone's like knocks on the door. My mom answered. And we were like, oh, shoot, this residential line was a bad idea.
They can find us.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. So you start taking some of the lessons, some of the like I'm really getting the sense that it was like a path of least resistance. Like you're seeing who's kind of the cream that's coming to the top out of all the different businesses you're working with, and kind of the potential clientele. And it keeps, like using your words, it keeps coming back to kind of that real estate sector. That's the one that is seeing like there's the most opportunity. So what was that next evolution of that environment like to get you to the point of kind of growth mentality?
Yeah. So we, at some point, I don't remember the year, but at some point early 2002, 3, 4, something, Yahoo or GoDaddy, one of them started offering web hosting super cheap, like super cheap monthly fee, way cheaper than we could compete on. And that was a bit of a problem for us. And so we started providing. So the interesting thing from a realtor point of view, the realtors, the dentist has a website. The website is the website. You don't change it. Realtors were constantly have a new listing, have to add it to the website. Now this listing sold, take it down, or market is sold. Like they always had to do stuff where lots of other businesses didn't do anything. They wanted the website up and not touch it again. And so we were always getting calls from realtors of like, hey, I got a new, or they'd fax us the MLS sheet of like, hey, put this up on the website. And so we started doing that. We charged them a fee, $50, $100, whatever it was, to update their website. And then eventually we built what we called in the day like a listing tool. It was like a software tool to let the realtor log into their own website and manage their own listings. And we charged them more for that feature. So if you paid us $25 a month or whatever it was for web hosting, you'd pay us another, the realtors would pay another $25 a month for the listing management tool. And they would do it and they paid it. And that's where we started realizing like, well, the costs of being driven down of just basic web hosting, even high touch customer service web hosting, we weren't going to be able to compete if we stayed in that space. So we sold combustion hosting to a competitor, but we kept the realtor business. And we started another company called Ubertor, which was still technically a web hosting business, but we stopped talking about web hosting. We started talking about software for realtors. And because the realtors didn't understand web hosting either. They would talk about, like, we'd say you can have 50 megabytes of storage and 2 gigabytes of traffic, and they'd be like, what does that even mean?
Don't care.
And so they'd say, like, how many listings can I have on my website for that?
Right.
And so we learned quickly. It's like, geez, we got to talk to these guys in listing terms. And the web hosting is just it's a free part of the package because you don't care, we don't care. Like it was like the non-sexy part of the business. And so we launched Ubertor with a direct focus on realtors. We were a software company selling them software. The web hosting was free, but they were paying us a monthly fee to use the software application, which was at the beginning was the listing management tool, like super basic listing management tool. Yeah.
And were you like there was a software component? Were you still doing a lot of work in the back end? Like, did you have was there a lot of human interaction to kind of manage the information, the upload and download?
Like we started making templates so you could pick from template like A, B, C, or D. It's like a black side, a white side, a red side. It's like, oh, you're Remax, great. Like here's 3 that fit Remax colors or whatever.
Yeah.
And what they really wanted to understand was, how does the listing tool work? How many photos can I have with my listing?
Yeah.
Can I add a video? At the beginning, you couldn't add a video. Like, how do I have PDFs that are associated with the listing? Just all this, like, it seems really silly now, but all of this, like, super basic stuff. But at that time, it wasn't basic. Like, nobody you'd fax the MLS sheet to your web designer, and your web designer would charge you $100 to do it for you every time.
Right.
And we were the ones that automated and eliminated that extra cost. The realtors could just pay that monthly recurring fee and have full control of the site themselves. And then as they asked us for stuff, we built features so that we didn't want to do manual work anymore. We wanted to build features of the software so that they could continue to be self-sufficient. We could make the software better, and we could slowly drive the monthly price up, which is what we did. We started at $25 a month, and it slowly gets to $35, then $45,
Right.
then it's $59.99, then it's $75, and then there's VIP packages and whatever.
Yeah.
And that's how we built the business.
And so business starts with you and Mike. You hire a programmer at one point. You commented that was before Ubitor.
Yeah.
How kind of at the peak? How many staff? What was like? Were you in offices by this point? You're not working out of basements. What did that kind of business structure look like?
Yeah, we moved out of our parents' houses to move the office out, at least in 2003 or 2004.
Okay.
We got an office at the Waterfall building here in Vancouver, just outside of Granville Island. Awesome building. It was like a loft. We wanted a loft, like a live work unit, so that because we worked long days, entrepreneurs that don't have a lot of money to do stuff. There was lots of times where you're working long days, maybe you sleep in a bit and then back to work. And so we wanted a kitchen because we didn't have any money for restaurants or anything. So we just wanted to be able to be fully self-sufficient in a spot. But we wanted to be able to entertain and have guests and have like cocktail parties to bring realtors to sort of talk about what our software does and sort of show them who we were. And so, the Waterfall building was our first proper office. And then we started to have a small team of programmers and then young salespeople kind of running around, begging their way to get into real estate offices, to beg their way into like they do the weekly meetings to try and find our way into the front of the meeting for 5 minutes to say, hey, this is what I do. Here's what Ubitor is all about. Like, I'll be sitting over here in the phone booth thingy. Come find me after your meeting if you want to talk about websites. And that's kind of how we started to ramp it up.
And so they were running around Vancouver originally. At what point did you start to get calls from, or did you start to get calls from real estate agents beyond the borders of kind of British Columbia and Lower Mainland?
Yeah. So one of the keys in the real estate world is tying in, like once the MLS systems decided that they were willing or able to syndicate the data where you didn't need the realtor updating it, you could tie into the local MLS and the listings would update themselves. We started doing that integration work, which was a bit of a nightmare at the time. I'm sure I don't know if it still is. It probably
still is.
Probably still is, because each board kind of does their own thing. They're all dealing in the exact same stuff, but they have like different flavors of this exact same thing. And so you got to integrate with one board and then you integrate with another, but the other calls the same thing a different term. And it's just, it's pretty inefficient how it's structured. But that's how we grew from board to board, is you'd figure out like, all right, if we're going to put an effort into Calgary, the first thing you got to do is tie into Calgary's MLS system, because otherwise the realtors wouldn't use it by that point where the manual work was done. So we would tie into an MLS system and then go do the work to attack that municipality or that city or town or whatever it was, to go and find our way into realtor offices. Like at the beginning of the business, we would go realtor by realtor, literally, like I said at the beginning, like phoning their cell phones because we found it. Then we figured out like, oh, it's way better to go to the office where they all show up. And we found, I was like, oh, these guys do weekly meetings. And it's like, let's get into the meeting. We'll bring donuts. We'll do whatever we got to do to hack our way into that. And then we realized, man, it's like way better if we can get into the board. Let's get into the board and keep pushing top down. And so then we started doing deals with the real estate boards. So like I did a deal with the Calgary Real Estate Board with Krebs back in the day, where they were offering realtor websites to their, I don't know how many, 7,000 agents or whatever. Yeah. But it was, they were offering Ubitor. It was a joint venture partnership with us. So we were the back end platform. And then I didn't need the sales team doing it. Krebs was doing it and pushing it down to their agents. And so we did a bunch of those types of things around different municipalities in Western Canada.
And I mean, there's a million lessons in there for kind of scaling, growing business, ease of, I've used the term a couple of times already, path of least resistance, like finding your way to that end consumer, but doing it at kind of en masse, build that business faster. Some of that, it sounds like, was intentional. Like you saw the opportunity and you went and kind of fostered that a little bit. Some of it was driven by technology, like being able to grow outside of was kind of that data feed, having the access to the data from the boards. How much of it would you say was kind of intentional as you continued to grow? Like, have you been able to adopt some of that kind of growth strategy as you've kind of continued in the business journey?
Yeah, like we were always trying to find the most efficient way possible to get this done.
Yeah.
And that's why we moved to templates. Like at the beginning, we were custom building every website, and we learned very, very quickly that they all want the same website with like marginally different changes and the same post photo. And so like it's it's generally all the same. It's just
I just have to say, for the audio listen, for people listening on audio, which will be everybody. Yeah, you killed the typical realtor pose with your arms crossed and a little bit of a lean.
Everybody knows the realtor. I don't know why they still do it. It's like all of society knows. It's like you see a picture like, oh, you're a realtor.
Totally a realtor. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they all kind of do the same thing. It's all literally the same.
Right.
It's just like choosing your lipstick or your hair color or choosing your whatever. It's like you're just changing a little bit on the look and feel of it, but essentially it's all the same. Oh, swap Remax for Century 21, swap this for that. It's like you have listings, some are for sale, some are sold. Where's your blog? Let me show you your videos. Like it's all the same.
Yeah.
And so that's when we learned it was much more efficient by moving our way up the chain. And if we could get the boards pushing it down and tying the board into the revenue, because the boards they're always looking for revenue, right? They need revenue as well as anybody else. So if we could tie up a product into their built-in customer base, like they have 3,000 realtors or 5,000 realtors or whatever, these people all have to pay them certain fees for certain things.
Yeah. If
we could find that efficiency and go top down, it was way better for us as well as for the agents.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. Okay, so I think we're moving into kind of this part of the story that I'm super fascinated about. You've got Ubertor, you're growing, you've got opportunity for scale. That's all playing out, and then you see opportunity outside of Canada from an operational perspective. What was that? What did that kind of the impetus to kind of look offshore? How did that all play out?
So 2008 happened, which you asked me about 2000 of the .com crisis. Like we weren't total, like 2008, we were paying attention.
Yeah. You felt it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that global financial crisis, like thanks America. It really caused some challenges, and lots of businesses were trying to figure out like, wow, how do I keep doing what I'm doing, but how do I cut my costs? And we were already at that point, Ubertor was dabbling in colleagues, like teammates that we had found through Craigslist that would work for us from outside of Canada. Like we found a couple of guys in the Dominican Republic that we put job ads out on Craigslist, and for stuff that could be done from anywhere, and web designers or base level customer service, because we were still doing lots of manual work where a realtor would want like, I need this, but make it look like this. So we'd need cost effective solutions to some of that manual work, and so we were kind of comfortable dealing with people that we'd never met in real life. And we were okay with it. And so 2008 happened, and we thought maybe we should go check out, get deeper into an offshored solution for some of our back office work, customer service, billing, web design, those types of roles. And so we looked very quickly at India and the Philippines, which are kind of the two big ones. And we decided on the Philippines. Mike's half Filipino, but I don't think had ever been there, was born here. doesn't speak the language. He's not, but he had
Right.
family there. So we thought like, well, there's like a little bit of something for us in the Philippines than India, where we just like, we don't know anything about anything here. So we got on a plane and went to Manila with the idea of like, let's just go find an outsourcing operation where we could hire 10 or 15 people through them, and we could build out our own customer service team in another outsourcing operation. And 2008's happening and things are getting worse. And then we thought like, maybe this sort of dumb entrepreneurs like, maybe there's a great idea here where we should get into the outsourcing business ourselves, and we could be more bold and like, we should do it. And so we did. We set up a Philippine corporation and we set up an office. We built it out for 150 staff, and Ubertor was the first customer of the Philippine corporation. So Ubertor hired the first 10 or 15 workers, worked in the outsourcing business, which was a Philippine entity, but they licensed their time to Ubertor. And that was kind of how we kicked off figuring out outsourcing. Was we had a built-in first customer. It was us. And so we got the office up and running. We had a lot of challenges. We thought we'd be there in 90 days, get it all set up and good to go. I went home 90 days. I just got married at that point. So when Mike and I left in 2008, I was gone for about 90 days straight. Mike was there 90 days. I came back home. Mike stayed. Mike was there almost 2 years. Dealing with was constantly figuring out, how do you hire? How do you set up the systems and procedures for running a team? There's different cultural things you had to figure out. It's just a bunch of stuff that didn't know. And then I was here setting up, not only we got Ubertor up and running, but then we started licensing our outsourcing teammates to customers in Canada, which happened to be realtors. So lots of realtors had assistants, but they had assistants sitting in their offices. 2008 was hurting them as well. So we started selling or leasing labor from the Philippine market into the Canadian market directly into realtors, residential realtors, and real estate offices that were looking for virtual assistants. And that's why, so I stayed on this side of it, building up that business. And we built the outsourcing business in Manila we had 150 staff. We ran 3 8-hour shifts. All the computers, all the desks. We're running a 24-hour operation. Just
unreal.
It was crazy. It was fun, but it was nuts. I didn't have that in my bingo card of where my life would take me.
Well, but here's the thing, Steve. You didn't have any of it on your bingo card. No. It's the true when you use the word entrepreneur. It's you find a gap and fill it, right? Like even if I don't know what that looks like, you are looking at advertising in taxis, and you start an entirely different business because that was the opening, the gap that you saw, right? You go to Manila to look for a little bit of offshore labor, and you start a business around that, filling that gap in Canada. And it just a true definition of entrepreneurialism. I love it.
Yeah. So we're super smart or super stupid, one of the two.
Well, but I think it's the latter. because so much of it is learning as you go. You're not smart to be able to do it. You're dumb to be able to take on to go out and try it. Right?
Totally. The risk tolerance is high for lots of people will be like,
has to be.
This is insane. No chance would I do this. Yeah.
And then once you start, the tenacity to see it through, the 2 years, committing 2 years. So you've got 150 people in Manila or area in the Philippines that are providing services in Manila. And then at what point do you say to your relatively new bride, okay, let's give this a go. Let's move to Manila for a couple of years.
So Mike's over there dealing on the backside of the business of setting up the systems and procedures around all these people, right? It was a full HR business, right? You're leasing people's time. We're good at, if there's a bug in the software and you complain to me about the bug in the software, I can make a ticket and our engineers can fix the thing. And then we roll out a fix and you're happy and everybody's happy. We move forward. if
Sure.
your virtual worker doesn't show up to work that day because we're like stuck on the bus, but they don't, many of the time, especially at that time, they didn't have cell phone access when they were in transit. So we would have no idea where the guy was either. But
Yeah.
you as the customer would be mad at me in Vancouver. I'd be calling back into Mike, be like, hey, you know, this customer's employee's not there. We couldn't plug in somebody else because you'd taken the time to train that person up. So it wasn't as simple as just, let's just plug in, like, let's just fix the bug and solve the problem. We couldn't. So we'd have an unhappy customer. We'd have an HR challenge on the backside of the business and trying to, you know, it was a lot. And so that's like, we started building a software tool to manage time attendance and scheduling, and then eventually Philippine payroll. Like at that time, everybody was doing payroll on their
so good.
Excel documents.
just keep building, man.
Yeah, well, this is like, it's Mike. Like Mike's sitting there losing his mind in Manila over HR challenges. If someone didn't clock in for work, didn't show up, what shift are they on? Like, so we took some of our engineers from Ubitor and we started building a software, an internal software tool for time attendance scheduling. So it's like clock in, clock out, facial recognition, clock in, clock out. It takes a photo of you when you got to the office on an iPad on the wall. The system knew that was you. It knew you're supposed to be at work at 9 a.m. If it's 8:55, good for you. You're on time. It knows what you're supposed to be doing and what desk you're supposed to be at. And then we added Philippine payroll into it. Philippine payroll is quite complex. Many times it's different per city, not per province.
Wow.
Like it's a lot.
Yeah.
And we ended up building a payroll platform because we didn't want to do it on Excel either. And so we tied it all together, time attendance scheduling and payroll, so that we could automate Philippine payroll for our 150 staff and try and solve some of these HR challenges around scheduling. And Mike and I are in this group called EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. And at one point I was, something happened. The EO event came through our office. You know, you kind of do like a lunch and learn. A bunch of entrepreneurs show up, and your job is to kind of show them around of like, here's what we do, and here's some unique stuff that we do, and they get to learn from whatever you're doing in your business. And just like you go to some guy who owns 400 restaurants, you learn about how his restaurant business works, and you get to learn about how the frozen chicken trucks show up, and like just all the stuff that you might not know. It's just meant to be an educational, eye-opening experience. And part of that lunch and learn thing was we showed the payroll tool that we had built internally, and a bunch of the Philippine EO members were like, holy moly, can I use that? Can I license this?
Jeez.
And so that got us thinking like, maybe. So we ended up setting up a company that called Payroll Hero that did payroll for Philippines and then eventually Singapore. And then that was about 2012. And then that's when I moved over to the Philippines. So I suggested to my wife, I think it was time to move. We had two little kids by that point, a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. And we picked up and we moved to Taguig, this place next to Makati, which is kind of the main business district of Manila. And we moved there. And the reason I was going in, Mike would come swap back out, is because now we're sort of switching roles around. We're going to start pushing this payroll software into Philippine businesses. And to do that properly, I would sort of need to be on the ground to figure out, like, all right, how we're going to do this? Like, how do we find businesses in the Philippines that want to use a payroll software tool? And so we moved over there. I was there from 2012, basically 2.5 years. We lived in Manila, and then another 1.5 years in Singapore. We moved back home to Vancouver in late 2016. But so
just finding those gaps and filling them. What was so when you and I talked, you talked about kind of the personal aspect of obviously moving to an entirely different country. It wasn't your wife wasn't super thrilled about it, but then loved it and it became home. But from a business perspective, like I know that it's a laundry list of challenges. What was the primary challenge, kind of plunking yourself in there and saying, okay, I'm going to try and find businesses to adopt our payroll systems? Was it language? Was it culture? Was it?
Yes.
So
it's all the standard things, right? Like, there's lots of stuff. Like, I'm not a small person, physically small.
Right.
I'm not that little. And so me showing up into an office in the Philippines was there's not a lot of foreigners running around trying to talk to the payroll department of a Philippine business of whatever. And so I had challenges around finding my way in. I could find my way into the owners, but the owners a lot of the time didn't know or care what was going on or what tool their payroll team used. And they were cool if they were doing it manually and didn't register on their world. So there was some cultural issues that I would have where the head of payroll in a corporation just didn't want to speak to me, and they're very accustomed to speaking in Tagalog and English, but they flip back and forth quite a bit. But I obviously only speak English. And so, they would always joke that they would get headaches or nosebleeds of just having to always be thinking Tagalog, converting in their brain, speaking into me in English. I would be asking them questions about whatever, and they would want to switch back to Tagalog, and because that would be how they would normally answer some of these questions about how their software or their payroll tasks worked. So there was challenges like that. Then I started bringing people with me that would be able to assist on some of that front. We had challenges around at that time. Businesses in the Philippines didn't want to pay with credit card. Like they weren't accustomed to paying with credit card online at all. And I couldn't understand why. It's like, I know that the owners of these businesses have credit cards. I've been in restaurants with them where they pay with a credit card. But we started learning there was just different rules around credit cards in the Philippines. Like if your credit card gets used by one of your staff on something that you didn't necessarily buy or was some sort of fraud, it's all on you. There's not the same protections that we have in Canada and the US around credit card fraud. You just call Visa and be like, I didn't do that. And they'll wipe it off your bill. So they was just not accustomed to having the credit card out there with the staff using it for stuff. They would much rather send a guy on a motorcycle with a check to pay the bill. And it's super common. There's always delivery guys running around paying with checks. And that's
but when you're building a virtual environment.
Yeah. And they wanted to do it this is the other problem. They wanted to pay in pesos, Philippine pesos. And we wanted to collect in US dollars. Because all of the expenses for the most part of the software company are US dollars, right? The software engineering, we'd be using a lot of third-party tools that you license and pay, like SaaS tools, like things like Stripe or whatever.
Right.
A lot of that stuff is in USD as well. And so we were, I think, just a bit early in that world. There was just these sort of fundamental challenges of how do we get some of these things over the line so that people can pay in the way we want them to pay, sign up in the way that we want them to sign up. And so there was, lots of those challenges of us just trying to figure out stuff of how do we operate in their world instead of me trying to force our world into theirs. We had to sort of flip it around and learn.
Yeah. You mentioned being early. I mean, it feels like every one of your business ventures is kind of early or just out of the gate of when things are changing. Right. And that's where you're kind of seeing not necessarily the gap, but the gap tied to the opportunity that, just the internet in general in 1999, when you started to look at web hosting, all of those things are, you're just on kind of the cutting edge. And that, then you're learning as much as you are trying to educate clients and that kind of thing. The other thing, I thought this was brilliant too. It came to mind from our previous conversation when you mentioned pesos, the tracking systems, just having those extra zeros because they work in so much larger figures, right? And so that just created more opportunity for error. And that's where you were seeing kind of some of the digitization opportunity, right?
Well, that's the problem. Is you have 150 staff, and if you're doing your payroll in Excel documents, and people are paid, 60,000 pesos a month or 80,000 pesos a month, the numbers can get quite big in the Excel document. So 60,000 pesos today, I'm just doing the conversion, is $1,071 US dollars.
Right.
So, which is maybe that's, think about it as an average person. So if you've got about 150 people, it's 60,000 pesos. You're dealing in hundreds of thousands of the numbers are just really big. It's an extra little sneaky little zero somewhere in there. It's and the whole thing being done in Excel is opportunity for not only necessarily fraud, but also just simple mistakes.
Right.
Supposed to be, someone's supposed to get 60,000 pesos and it becomes 69,000 pesos. Super hard to notice. if you're doing
Crazy.
it that manually. And that's why we wanted to get it systemized so that we had full control over the movement of the money.
Yeah. Okay, so you're there for 2.5 years, 3.5 years, 2 years in Manila.
2.5 years in Manila, year and a half in Singapore.
Year and a half in Singapore. You get all of that up and running. So now at this point, you've got Payroll Hero and Ubertor, or was
no? We sold Ubertor while we lived in Manila. We sold it in 2013.
Yeah. And what was the biggest lesson learned there? Like, was there something that after selling a company that you had, you sold a piece of it early on, the first iteration, you kept kind of the realtor side, which became Ubertor. Selling Ubertor at that point, was there a piece that, looking back, even just the next year, you went, we should have? Or was it kind of what you expected it to be?
We sold the web hosting company. I'm glad we did that. Keeping the realtor piece and setting up Ubertor was smart. I think we had, with 2003 is when we started Ubertor. We sold it 10 years later, so 2013.
Yeah.
I think the timing was right for Mike and I. Right, we had no investors in that business. It was a good timing for us in like personal lives to have some money. And I think the timing made sense around what we were up to, and there was some money on the table that fit for, like, I had a young family. I was over in Manila. Like,
sure.
It just all made sense.
Yeah.
Like the neat thing about it, and maybe the downside, but I don't care at all, actually. The neat thing about it is Ubertor still exists. The owners of it have consolidated other competitors of ours underneath ours. Some of our existing employees still work at Ubertor in the Philippines.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And so, like, the structure that we built, the software that we built, the SOPs, I'm sure they've adjusted stuff. It's now more than 10 years since we sold it. But it's just neat to see it still exists. Like, what we sold is what we said it was, and it was what we said it was, and it was like they got exactly what they were supposed to get. And the business has gone on for another 10 years. Like, sure, if we held on to it, we would have maybe made more money or whatever, but it didn't matter at the time. It was the right thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think that, like, you want to consider a lot of these things business decisions, and it's just business, but there is a sense of reward in that when it's still carrying on, and you can say, like, we built that foundation and it was exactly what we thought it would be. Like, it was able to,
like,
to carry on.
Said it was.
Yeah.
Because in software, it's really easy to, like, there's always sneaky things underneath like a little secret that I know is like, glad they didn't ask us about that. Like, they got what we said they were going to get, and they got a very strong, stable operating business that makes money. Yeah.
Very awesome. Okay. So we're 2016, you move back to, you've sold off Ubertor. You've still got, and you've still got Payroll Hero, right? You're still a shareholder in it. Yeah.
And we shut down the outsourcing company when we kind of kicked off Payroll Hero. We basically sold some of the contracts to other people. We got out of the outsourcing business and shut it down.
Yeah. And then you get back to Vancouver, and at some point along the way, and this is the next chapter in your story, I think, is you see more opportunity in the real estate sector, but less related to realtors and more related to consumers and property. So what was that? Walk me through kind of what that looks like and where that idea came from.
Yeah. So Mike and I had always been buying real estate personally since kind of the beginning of us working together. Like, I bought my first investment condo in Vancouver in 1999 or 2000. Like, right around when we were trying to start the business. I remember telling my mom and dad, as like, I'm buying this condo, and they're like, nice, like, good for you. You're going to move out. That's like, great job. And I was like, I'm not moving out. I'm not going anywhere. This is an investment condo. The food's great here. So I bought this condo downtown.
Quickly disappointed.
Yeah. But, it's like my first real estate investment was an investment condo. And again, I'm very aware of the luxury I had of living at home with my parents that allowed me to do that. The neat thing about it was, or I'd done some of these things over time as Mike and our careers sort of continued. And then when I got married, we bought a condo, and then we bought a house, and like we just doing our thing over the last from 1999 to 2016 when we got home. And so Mike had been doing the same thing as well for himself. And so we had the fortunate, rise of Vancouver real estate, where you know how it is. It's like if you bought anything in the early days, 2000, 2001, like anything,
yeah,
and if you held onto it, you've done pretty well. And so that is so we'd done reasonably well on some of the real estate holdings that we had for up until the point of 2016. And so when we came home in 2016, Mike and I started dabbling in or looking at investing as limited partner investors behind real estate developers or behind real estate operators, and just trying to understand how that world works. And an opportunity had come Mike's way from a real estate developer who was raising capital for a development. Basically, the stuff that was going on for years here is like buy 3 or 4 houses in a row, rip them down, and build 30 or 40 or whatever townhouses, or build a small, condo building or whatever. And those developers would raise capital from accredited investors, and they would do that by pitching to accredited investors saying, hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm raising $5 million. I'm looking for 5 investors at $1 million each, or 10 investors at $500,000 each, or whatever. And they would break out their plan and the return projections and all the stuff. And then accredited investors would say, like, sure, like that sounds reasonable. The risk seems interesting and fair. The returns seem fair. Great, I'll give it a shot. And they would cut a check. And so this opportunity came Mike's way. It's kind of what I described. The minimum investment amount the developer wanted was $1 million. And the Mike had said, hey, to the developer, he's like, is it all right if I set up a syndicate? Like, can I just set up a corporation and have a few friends put in money? And the guy was like, sure, but I don't want to talk to any of those people. Like, I want one investor. I don't want a bunch of people. And Mike said, yeah, no problem. I'll take care of that. And so Mike had texted me and a few other friends of ours, and we got together and just looked at the opportunity. Said, sure, let's do this. And so we put together that corporation. Everybody put their money into the corp, and then the corp made the investment into the development. And when that syndicate was set up, it was set up as a $50,000 minimum investment requirement. So the developer wanted minimum of $1 million. The syndicate was set up with the minimum of a $50,000 investment requirement. And one of our employees at the time had $10,000 and wanted to participate. He kind of heard what we were talking about in the office and said, hey, like, can I get involved? This sounds interesting. He was a young guy and like wanted to participate. And unfortunately for him, the answer was no, he couldn't.
Right.
And he didn't take it, very well. He got kind of mad. He's like, what do you mean? Like $10,000 is a lot of money. Like, what's the difference between $10,000 and $50,000? Like, I get it. It's a bit more, but $10,000 is a lot of money. And we got into this conversation around the costs of dealing with investors is painful, right? When you wire money, it costs you $20 or whatever to send your wire. It also costs $20 for the receiver to receive the wire. Signing a subscription agreement that gets touched by a lawyer or a notary. Those people charge a couple $100 to move the paperwork. No matter if it's a $10,000 investment or $1 million investment, the notary or the lawyer is the same cost, no matter how many zeros are on the piece of paper. Dealing in tax slips at the end of the year, investor updates, like the list goes on and on and on, and all these things as to why everybody wants larger dollar investors and less investors possible, because they're costly and painful to deal with. And so it was that conversation with that employee who wanted to get in on an opportunity that kind of got our brains thinking around like, maybe there's an opportunity here for us to step into this space. We're good at automating things with software, and could we build a technology platform that enables regular Canadians to participate in the ownership of institutional grade commercial real estate for small dollars for retail investors? Could we enable all of that to happen through a tech platform that made it work? And so that's kind of where the idea came from. And then we set out to build what is now Addy, but we set out to kind of prove the concept of like, is this a stupid idea, or is this something that regular Canadians want to do? So Mike and I went and bought a single family house on the east side of Vancouver, backed right onto Trout Lake. It's an unbelievable location. Like you literally walk out the backyard and you're in the alley, which is in the park, which is at the lake. Like it was awesome location. So we bought this single family house for $1.6 million in 2018. And the plan was to put it on a very rudimentary version of the Addy software and put it out there to Canadians and say, hey, are you interested in investing? The goal would be, we're going to rip this house down, build a duplex, sell off the 2 units, and that should be some profit. And so we put it out to people. We ran some Facebook and Google ads, and it worked. We have 305 investors in that first property. 100 of them for sure are friends and family. Like my mom and dad are invested, my parents, like my brothers, my siblings. Like there's lots of those types of people that are being supportive and like, which is great, but also not helpful when you're trying to vet an idea. What we were really interested in was like some rando from Edmonton that found us on the web. Did that person that has no connection to us whatsoever feel comfortable and interested in signing up on this website, creating an account, moving money, signing a legal document, and investing into this address in Vancouver? Like that was the person we were trying to understand, is like, do random people want to do this? And so of the 305, 200 of them or so are total strangers to us. And that for us really validated of like, all right, like we're on to something. If people are willing and wanting to do this. And so those 305 investors joined. We bought that single family house, and then we sort of followed along on the plan of ripping it down, having a developer develop it. And then we've just sold the front and back units that were sold about a month and a half ago. And the return of capital has been done to all investors, and the first profit piece has already been pushed back out to investors. But that's what kind of kicked us off into this Addy world.
It's such a cool technology platform opportunity for the average for an average Canadian to be able to, like you say, retail invest in existing real estate, commercial real estate. I love all that aspect of it. One of the commonalities that I'm linking together now is your testing environment before scaling. And if you go back to all of the different kind of business ventures that you've started and grew, you know, even the Craigslist, like using offshore talent through Craigslist, you had that experience, and then you went out to Manila to see, okay, can we scale this for our own business? And then it becomes, okay, what would this look like for other businesses? And it's the same environment here. It's not a small investment, obviously, 1.6 million, but you're doing this very small scale, like you said, rudimentary product initially before you build out. There's so many times that I hear stories of startups building a product that they think is going to be the end version, and they put months or years, millions of dollars into development, and they haven't proven yet that it actually will work out in the actual wild, right?
Yeah.
And so that, that's a key piece to your growth success, is making sure you're doing that testing in the initial stages. It's brilliant.
Yeah, there's a concept called hallway testing, or the minimum viable product.
Yeah.
This is all from the Lean Startup, from Eric Ries's book, around there's this saying, like, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you waited too long to launch it. Right. Like when we launched that Trout Lake property, like it looked okay and it looked like it was automated. It was not automated. We were fully manually doing everything in the background, because there was no point in building all the software if we got to the end of that thing and people didn't choose to invest. There was no point in spending a bunch of money building software to find out this is a dumb plan, and Mike and I are just going to have to go buy this house and do it ourselves. The MVP was to try and do the least amount to validate that there is something here that the consumer or the customer, whoever, wants to do this kind of thing, and test it before we get too deep and into the costs.
Yeah. What would you say, out of all of those business, the growth that you've had, the success that you've had, what would be, like, outside of that testing environment, what would be a common theme that you've seen as an entrepreneur, as a business, business strategist and a business owner and an entrepreneur in that journey? It's such a wild story. I love it.
It is nuts. I don't know. I think like common theme, we're like, Mike is really good at seeing around corners, right? That sounds weird, I guess, to say, but like, obviously sometimes we've taken a left, we should have taken a right, but there's lots of things that he'll be like, like, what about this? and he'll come and we'll talk about it. And I'll be like, it's an interesting angle or an interesting thing. And so we'll dig into it a bit around, trying to validate it in our minds and do what I was talking about, like that hallway testing or minimum viable.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing, is this a good thing? Like, so there's lots of that kind of stuff of interesting ideas that have come to light, where I think a lot of people would be like, no, like, I'm not moving to the Philippines, or no, I'm not building an outsourcing company. Like, no, I'm not building a payroll software company for a country I've never been to. Like, what are you talking about? Like a dyslexic guy in the middle of a payroll software company? Like, what? So there's lots of reasons why many of these things shouldn't have happened. But I think probably, the common theme would be just the willingness or drive or to chase down some of these, what maybe seem like crazy ideas.
Yeah, that risk appetite is such a feature of entrepreneurs. It has to be, right?
It is.
Yeah.
But also it can be dangerous, right? You can like I said, you can go left when you should have gone right, and maybe it takes you a few months and a bunch of money, and the business dies. Or you just go down that path for too long, and then you're like, shoot, I should have been going the other direction.
Totally.
Like, it's super hard when you're building all of these businesses. You don't know what you're doing. Like at least what we do, it's like, it's not like, let's just go start a restaurant. It's like, okay, so you get a restaurant, you get the tables, you got to come up with a menu, you got to hire some chefs, you got to hire, like, there's kind of a roadmap for it. For lots of the stuff we do, there's no real roadmap. We have an idea in our minds of where we want to be, but we don't necessarily know how we're going to get there.
Yeah. Steve, this has been a wild conversation. I appreciate you taking the time so much. I feel like definitely there's going to be a follow-up episode. We could unpack a lot of this and talk about the success of Addy as you continue to grow that business. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a true pleasure.
No problem. Thank you for having me.